neurological staff at George Washington University Hospital has done a scan on Brady, that he is seriously injured, that he is on a life support system, that he is in the intensive care unit. We have another report that has to do with the weapon that was used at the hotel this afternoon, allegedly by the young man from Colorado. It was a Harrington Richardson .22 caliber revolver that was not a Saturday night special, that it cost more than $100, up to $160, and there are lots of different models of it, that it was an expensive weapon. I'd just like to repeat that apparently the Brady family has requested 2 priests, has asked to summon 2 priests to the hospital, and that a doctor there apparently has the press secretary on a life support system and in the intensive care unit. Dan?
Jed, from Lynn Knopfsinger, the White House aide who arrived at the hospital just about the time President Reagan did, and who early in the afternoon performed a valuable service by stating the few facts that were known, Lynn Knopfsinger, I'm told, has just said the following. That there has been no, I repeat for emphasis, no open heart surgery performed on President Reagan. Apparently a rumor, as rumors are bound to start under these kind of circumstances, that a rumor apparently started that the President perhaps was undergoing heart surgery. Lynn Knopfsinger says that no open heart surgery has been performed on President Reagan. This surgery, by the way, was described as, in the beginning, as exploratory surgery, and we were led to believe had to do with a punctured lung, the President's lung punctured by the .22 caliber weapon, and that was the reason for the exploratory surgery. Lynn Knopfsinger says no open heart surgery has been performed on the President. Lynn Knopfsinger also says that James Brady, the White House press secretary, is still alive. He described, I believe, Brady's condition as being serious, but says Lynn Knopfsinger, James Brady is still alive. Number 3, Lynn Knopfsinger says that President Reagan is expected to be out of surgery shortly. No definition of what shortly might be. Number 4, Lynn Knopfsinger says that a physician will brief on the President's condition within the hour. Some of you, particularly alert and who've been with the broadcast for quite some time, may recognize that no physician has briefed at all on the condition of the President or on James Brady. Sometimes that would be taken as an unusual circumstance, but under these conditions, probably not, in that, to get the time frame, the shooting occurred about 2:30 this afternoon Eastern Time outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. President Reagan may not have even realized right away, even he may not have realized that he was struck, according to Lynn Knopfsinger. The President got to the hospital, he walked in, he talked to people there, there was discussion about surgery, all of this took time. The decision was finally made that yes, there should be exploratory surgery. The President was given a blood transfusion before the surgery, indicating that he had some internal bleeding. The President went into surgery sometime after 4 o'clock, and at last report, he was still in surgery, but Lynn Knopfsinger said he was expected out of surgery shortly, and that the physician would be briefing within the hour. Dr. Imster, would it come as a surprise, would it come as a shock to you to find that any kind of heart surgery has been performed on the President?
Yes, I would be surprised because of the previous reports which suggested that the bullet had entered the lung but had missed the heart. The only heart surgery that would be contemplated under these conditions would be if the heart itself were damaged by the bullet. And occasionally this does occur and the heart can be repaired, but it seems unlikely that that has been the case here from the reports that we do have.
We'll be coming back to Dr. Reamster at various times through the evening. We're very appreciative of you taking time to sit with us here, and we're hoping to have a physician brief on the President's condition within the hour. As stated during the afternoon, CBS News intends to remain on the air straight through until we have some definitive word on President Reagan's condition. That the question mark at the moment in terms of the overall afternoon is the condition of James Brady, the White House press secretary. We've had these conflicting reports during the afternoon. There were what seemed to be confirmed reports that Brady had not survived the gun attack. However, the White House officially said through Larry Speaks, its spokesman, sometime after that James Brady remained alive. That was as of about an hour and a half ago. More recently, there have been reports that clergy had been summoned to the hospital. However, for Mr. Brady, but Lynn Nofsinger was quoted as saying just a short while ago that James Brady was still alive. We simply will have to see on that as the evening goes along. As to President Reagan's condition, the most that can be said is what has been said right along, that the president was hit on the left side by a bullet that entered under his left arm. You may recall seeing the president on the videotape with his, he waves with both arms, but he waved first with his right, then with his left. And apparently what happened as the president had his arm up in a wave position just before he got to the limousine, and those of you who've seen the videotape, and we'll show it again here shortly, a bullet entered under his left arm and struck him somewhere in the left chest, missed the heart, according to the best available information, but punctured a lung. This being a .22 caliber slug, it may be a little difficult to find it in there, and the surgery has now gone on for about 2 hours and maybe slightly more than 2 hours. Now we have an Associated Press photographer as a picture of John Hinckley Jr. The man, this is a picture moved by Associated Press. The source of the photograph, the original source, well, we do not know. Hinckley has been variously described as 22 years old, 23 years old. A Washington police briefer within the last hour and a half says he is a 25-year-old native of Evergreen, Colorado. This is John Hinckley Jr., spelling on that last name H-I-N-K-L-E-Y. Hinckley is listed as a suspect. So far as we know, he has not yet been charged with any crime. Hinckley, or a man identified as Hinckley, was taken into custody outside the Washington Hilton Hotel shortly after the shooting. I am told by the device in my ear that Walter Cronkite is ready with an audio report from Moscow, so we try now to bring in Walter Cronkite.
Feeling a little like being in another world, perhaps on another planet, sitting here this night looking out a window on the lights of Moscow as the news comes blaring out of the radio and rattling across the teleprinters. There's no way to know what the reaction or feelings of the Soviet leaders may be at this hour of the night, but this correspondent can say that if there's anything more despairing than watching and listening to the horrible news on television and radio at home tonight, it's sitting in a foreign capital, and particularly one where the rivalry with everything American is particularly acute. And knowing that a few hours from now, on the morrow, one's going to have to face a lot of Russians who are going to ask with their eyes, if not their voices, what sort of society is it that our democracy has built in the West? As one whose reportorial career is now included an unsuccessful attack on President Truman and the assassination of President Kennedy, it's a difficult question to answer. This is Walter Cronkite reporting from Moscow.
Walter Cronkite in Moscow on assignment with that report. He's been feeding his reports during the afternoon to the Soviet reaction, saying earlier that the TASS news agency had moved a report on an assassination attempt on President Reagan and mentioning that other people had been hit, but not mentioning immediately, TASS did not, that the president himself, President Reagan himself, had been struck. I pause for a moment to remind you that CBS News will have a 1-hour special report tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That would be at 7 p.m. Central Time on the attempted assassination of President Reagan. In the meantime, we'll be remaining on the air live here from CBS News headquarters in New York and from our CBS Washington Bureau with our correspondents at the George Washington Hospital and the District of Columbia Police Station. The man in custody and listed as a suspect, not yet charged, listed as a suspect by District of Columbia Police, 25 and apparently is 25-year-old John Hinckley Jr. of Evergreen, Colorado. A footnote that a spokesman for Texas Tech University in Lubbock, out in West Texas, has told our CBS-affiliated station KLBK that a John Hinckley attended Texas Tech University from 1974 to 1980, not continuously, but at various times during that period, and that the John Hinckley who attended Texas Tech University did not graduate from that school. Now, we cannot be certain that this is the same John Hinckley as is listed as a suspect with the Washington police force at the moment. This is outside the Washington Hospital. Lynn Nofsinger is there with our correspondent Jim McManus.
We're here with Assistant to the President, Lynn Nofziger, who has briefed the press down the street, but we'd like him to just tell us what the condition of the President is at this point.
The President's condition is good. It is stable. He should be out of surgery shortly. He may be since I left. The thing I wish to repeat is there have been a lot of bad rumors going around. He has not had open heart surgery. He is in good shape. And we will have a briefing by a medical doctor probably within the hour, and they can go into all the details of it.
We had heard that the President was conscious going into the operating room and that he was in fact joking. Are those rumors correct?
That is absolutely right. He was conscious, and he said to the doctors in the operating room, "I hope you're all Republicans."
What about Mrs. Reagan? How is she holding up?
Mrs. Reagan is fine. She's calm. She's concerned about her husband. She's concerned about Jim Brady. She's concerned, of course, about the other two wounded men, but she is fine.
Now, Lynn, there are rumors going around about the condition of Jim Brady, that he is in very serious condition. Can you tell us anything about Jim Brady?
I cannot comment on that. He is in surgery, and that is all I can tell you.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn. Lynn Nofziger, Assistant to President Reagan.
Jim McManus, our correspondent at George Washington University Hospital in Washington, D.C. And Nofziger has been extremely helpful during the afternoon, being at the hospital and coming out from time to time and giving us reports. Lynn Nofziger saying that we expect to have a physician brief on the President's condition within the hour, and the President should be out of surgery shortly. In our studio, Dr. Reemsma of Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. Again, I want to ask you about every 15 minutes if there's any growing concern in your mind about the length of this surgery.
No, there's no growing concern. I believe the length of time is appropriate for this kind of operation. Always takes a little extra time at the end of the procedure, so I would not be concerned. I think Mr. Nofziger has just given a very good summary, and from what he tells us, what the physicians have told Mrs. Reagan, I would be hopeful.
Jed DeVal, I understand that you have in our studios a physician on the staff of George Washington University Hospital, one who has not been involved with the surgery, but who is familiar with the surgical techniques.
That's right, Dan. This is Dr. Barry Levin on the staff at GW Hospital, and while he hasn't been to the hospital, he knows some of the people there. And I think, Dr. Levin, you've talked to some of them, haven't you? I think I should note, Dan, that the doctor is a specialist in thoracic and cardiovascular chest surgery, right?
Right.
What have you learned?
Well, basically, the last time I spoke to anyone, President Reagan was still in the operating room. Apparently, when he came into the emergency room with a gunshot wound to the left chest, initially, as usually in cases like this, apparently the chest x-ray showed a collapsed lung, and a chest tube was placed in the emergency room to re-expand the lung and also drain any blood which was in the left chest, and apparently a fairly significant volume of blood came out of the chest tube. I think one of the concerns was the fact that the bullet was lodged somewhere close to the heart, and the physicians who were taking care of him were concerned about the proximity of the bullet to the heart and some of the major blood vessels in the chest.
Have you worked on cases like this before, similar gunshot wounds,
Yes.
individuals in the same hospital?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Is it a fairly, I don't want to say routine, but is it a surgery that can be accomplished without too much danger?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, in most patients who do have gunshot wounds to the chest, they do not require going to the operating room. In most cases, you can just simply insert a tube into the chest to re-expand the lung and drain any blood in the chest. And probably, I think most large studies have shown only something like 10 to 20% of patients with gunshot wounds to the chest even require surgery, major surgery.
Have your associates over at the hospital told you where the bullet is in the president's chest? Is it in the lung or near the lung?
Well, apparently the bullet, from what I understand, the bullet went through the lower lobe of the left lung, and that's where the bleeding appeared to have come from. Apparently the bullet has not injured the heart, and in most cases, unless the bullet is lodged within a major blood vessel or a chamber of the heart, in most places the bullet does not have to be removed.
Is it common that a patient can be hit with a bullet the way the president apparently was and can get into a car and ride to the hospital and then get out of the car and walk into the hospital conscious and alert?
That's not uncommon at all, unless, of course, the patient has a major vascular injury or cardiac injury where he's lost tremendous volume of blood in a relatively short period of time and is in shock, but it's certainly consistent with some minor injury and fairly minor bleeding that on a short trip, like I'm sure it was for him to get to the hotel, from the hotel to the hospital, that he could have walked into the hospital.
Now, this surgery has apparently been going on, I think, for a little more than 2 hours.
I'm not exactly sure when it started or if it's still going on.
Well, we just heard Knopfsinger, the president's aide, say he should be out shortly.
Right.
So 2 or 2.5 hours, does that sound like the generally within the time period that an operation like this would take?
Yeah, it could take varying amounts of time depending on exactly what is found at the time of surgery and what needs to be done. Obviously, if there are major injuries, they take longer periods of time to repair than some minor injuries.
Thank you, Doctor. Is there any major point we've missed?
I don't think so.
Good. Thank you. Dan, let me just add one more thing that's just been handed over here. District of Columbia Police have charged John W. Hinckley with attempted assassination of the president and assault with intent to kill a police officer, and further charges are pending. That's just in. Dan?
Those are, of course, federal charges yet,
Yes.
as they would be in the District of Columbia and also under the law, which does make it a crime to attempt to assassinate
right.
a president.
That's right.
Jed, I would like to ask the doctor if he has heard anything at all about the condition of James Brady, about which there's been so much confusion during the afternoon.
I've heard nothing about James Brady. He's apparently on the neurosurgical service, and I've heard nothing about him.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Reamson here in our New York studios. Does anything occur to you to ask the doctor that might be helpful in gathering information?
I think he's given us an excellent summary of the course, and I would agree with his view that the length of time is appropriate for the kind of injury that the president has had, and I would also be hopeful that his recovery will be complete.
Well, to both of the physicians who are with us, Dr. Levine in Dr. Levin in Washington, Dr. Reamson here in New York, let me state this question with respect, but also directly. Frequently when things aren't going well in surgery, everybody is told, it's all right, everything is okay, everything is okay. Now, what are the chances that that's what's happening in this situation?
Remote. No physician would, under any circumstances, but particularly when the circumstances involve the life of the President of the United States, would purposely mislead the wife of the President or the public.
From everything that I've heard, things are going very well, and the President's been stable throughout the time that he entered the emergency room and throughout the entire course of his surgery.
Dan, can I jump in with a couple of things? John Ferrugia of CBS has told us that Vice President Bush is on the ground at Andrews, and I'd like to ask Dr. Levin one more question on the general subject. When you have seen patients come in with similar wounds and have gone through the similar procedure at GW Hospital, how long has it been before they've been back on their feet and back at work?
Well, that depends on what type of work they do, obviously. I would say, barring any complications or anything like that, within 6 to 8 weeks from the time of surgery like this, a patient should be able to go back to all his normal activities. With the type work the President does, he would probably be able, barring any complications, would probably be able to return to some level of his work before that period of time. Right.
Thank you. Dan?
Jed and Doctor, thank you very much, and I hope the doctor will be able to stay on with us until we get some definitive word on the President's condition. This coverage is coming to you live from our CBS News headquarters in New York and CBS News headquarters in Washington, D.C. We intend to remain on the air with our continuous and live reporting until we have something definitive about President Reagan's condition. Now, from Leslie Stahl, our CBS News White House correspondent, we're told that White House officials say that President Reagan went into surgery at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. He went in a little earlier than we thought earlier, but White House officials now say he went into surgery at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That would, of course, be 3 o'clock Central Time. The White House officials say that the President is still in surgery, or was at least until a few moments ago, and that he continues to remain in good condition, that Mrs. Reagan has been told that her husband continues to remain in good condition. White House officials have told Leslie Stahl that the President was struck by one bullet that penetrated his chest on the left side. Mark, if you will, that there was some question as to whether he had been struck by one or more bullets. It becomes increasingly apparent that he was struck by only one bullet, at least that according to White House officials now, that bullet punctured his left lung, and the left lung went into what is described as a partial collapse. Now, Dr. Reemsner, here in our studio, I take it that even that information, the lung went into a partial collapse, does not concern you deeply and would be at least expectable under these circumstances.
Yes, that's an expected consequence of a bullet wound of the lung, and it is treated usually quite successfully by the methods that have been used on President Reagan.
One report quoting a doctor at the hospital, now this is again from Leslie Stahl, our White House correspondent, said the bullet missed President Reagan's heart by 1 inch. But several arteries were struck, and that's what caused part of the chest cavity to fill with blood. Now this, quoting an unnamed doctor at George Washington University Hospital in the nation's capital, said that the bullet missed the president's heart by 1 inch. Raises the question of who measured, but nonetheless, I think perhaps the doctor may have been taking a little literary license there, but that several arteries were at least damaged by the bullet, and that filled part of the chest cavity with blood. Now that would correspond with earlier reports from Phil Jones, quoting sources on Capitol Hill, as saying very early in the afternoon that the president had one blood transfusion before he actually underwent surgery. And indeed, if there was internal bleeding, it would be standard practice for the president to have a blood transfusion. Officials say Mrs. Reagan was rushed to the hospital. She was told there that all of the president's vital signs were stable and that his condition was good. And in fact, when Mr. Reagan arrived at the hospital, it's now been confirmed by White House officials, we had it much earlier in the afternoon, that he walked in, and once inside the hospital, he joked with those around him, including Mrs. Reagan, as the decision was being made on whether he should or should not undergo surgery. The decision was made for him to undergo exploratory surgery. He went into surgery something just over 2.5 hours ago, and we now are awaiting some official word, some definitive word on the president's condition, and also awaiting word that he is out of surgery and hopefully out of danger. We were told about a half hour ago by Lynn Nofziger that we could expect a physician at the hospital to brief us within the hour. Just now we will pause for another look at the videotape of the actual shooting outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. The president first waves with his right arm, then you see his left arm go up, and there comes the shot. Secret Service agent Jerry Parr pushing the president into the limousine. James Brady, the White House press secretary, is hit. That man with the what looked like the suitcase is a White House man who carries communications equipment, some first aid equipment with him. James Brady is on the sidewalk just to the left of your screen. You'll see him in a moment. This is a scene of police officers and Secret Service men getting under control and holding down the man who is suspected of the shooting. Man now charged, 25-year-old John Hinckley, Jr. Immediately, the Secret Service men and police see that James Brady is struck in the head by a shot, and they begin administering to him. They do not see right behind, right away, Tim McCarthy, the 32-year-old Secret Service agent who stopped a bullet and may have saved the president's life. Now they see that McCarthy has been hit. They're administering to him. McCarthy, the Secret Service agent, is now listed in serious but improving condition. A Washington policeman, Thomas Delahanty, was also hit. He's not in the film at the moment. Security agents, including one with an automatic weapon just to the left on your screen there, looking out for anybody who might try to get to the assailant, anybody who might continue the attack. Of course, security officers in these first few seconds after such a shooting don't know what the situation is, and they are trained to immediately secure the area as best they can. Down underneath that pile of policemen and Secret Service men being held down is John Hinckley, Jr., said to be from Evergreen, Colorado. We have just a stop frame on him, which we may be able to see later. To your right, James Brady struck right there, and off to his left, Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy. Out of view, the Washington policeman who was hit, Thomas Delahanty. Shots from a .22 caliber weapon, .22 caliber long was the ammunition. At least 6 shots had been fired. The Secret Service is trying to keep traffic away, trying to get a police car in. The president's limousine by this time has already sped to George Washington Hospital. One of the injured goes in the police car. There's scenes later of, this is Hinckley now going, and now the scene of Hinckley. They stop at one police car, then rush him over to the other police car. Man with his jacket or perhaps his raincoat pulled up, hunching over his shoulders. Pushed into the police car and taken to police headquarters, where hours later he was, a few hours later, was charged with the shooting. At least 6 shots. This is the still frame of the man the police were holding down at the scene of the crime. This is the man identified as 25-year-old John Hinckley, Jr. This is still frame from a videotape, blonde, of medium height, medium build. Just this one frame is the best picture in terms of definition that we have of him. We have a still photograph from Associated Press from apparently some time back of the man identified as 25-year-old John Hinckley, Jr. That was the scene in those frightful and terrorizing seconds outside the Washington Hilton Hotel, where President Reagan had gone to make a short speech in the early afternoon. We said before, a fairly routine thing for presidents, particularly in recent times, to go out of the White House. Their political officers inside the White House are constantly telling presidents you need to be out and be seen, particularly when there are important groups meeting in Washington. Presidents are encouraged to go speak to them, and so it was today as President Reagan went to the Washington Hilton to make a speech before an AFL-CIO group meeting at the Washington Hilton. Among other things, the President and his men have been trying to strike new avenues of communications, new bridges of mutual support between those in organized labor and the Reagan administration, and this was part of that continuing effort on the part of President Reagan. He was at the hotel partly for that reason. He made the speech at the hotel and then walked out of the hotel, and the scenes you just saw on the videotape followed. The president was rushed to the hospital. The early reports, for those of you who may have heard them, were that the president was unscathed, that he had not been hit by any of the at least 6 bullets that were fired. That turned out to be untrue, and one of the reasons given was that the president himself may not have known immediately that he had been hit. This is the helicopter carrying Vice President Bush from Andrews Air Force Base to the White House. Vice President Bush was in Texas today. As soon as he heard of the assassination attempt on President Reagan, he was put in a standby posture, and as soon as he heard that the president had been hit, Bush canceled his plans, and the vice president headed back to Washington at Andrews Air Force Base. He arrived there a short while ago, and this scene is of the helicopter carrying Vice President Bush in what looks like a drizzle and descending fog. Beautiful weather in Washington over the weekend, but the early spring can be raw in the Capitol, and so it looks early this evening as Vice President Bush took off by helicopter, presumably for the White House. And if he hasn't already arrived there, will be very shortly. It's unclear to me whether this is videotape or live coverage. This is live coverage, I'm told. It's live coverage of Vice President Bush taking off from Andrews Air Force Base and headed for the White House. Now, Secretary of State Haig was at the White House earlier this afternoon and said that he came over, paraphrase him, to hold things down to make sure somebody was in charge until Vice President Bush could get back. Interestingly enough, Secretary of State Haig misspoke himself in that briefing, if we heard him correctly, and I think we did, in that he listed that the succession to the president as the president, the vice president, and the Secretary of State. In fact, the succession to the president is the vice president, the Speaker of the House, the President pro tem of the Senate, and then the Secretary of State, followed by the Treasurer of the United States. But an understandable error and misspeak on the part of Secretary of State Haig, who, as he frequently has in the past, was alert to a situation that needed some command at the top, and Secretary of State Haig simply went over to the White House, as he said at the time, to be there and to be a presence there until Vice President Bush could get back. As you saw a few moments ago, Vice President Bush has arrived back at Andrews Air Force Base. Those were live scenes of his helicopter taking off from Andrews and headed for the White House. We're told by Leslie Stahl that Mrs. Reagan did not attend the president's speech to the labor meeting. There was some confusion about that earlier in the day, but she definitely did not. She did speed to the hospital as soon as she got word of the assassination attempt. The shooting, of course, set off a flurry of activity at the White House. I believe we now have scenes on videotape of Mrs. Reagan arriving.
Officials say that Mrs. Reagan, who was rushed to the hospital, was told that the president's vital signs were stable and his condition good. In fact, when the president arrived at the hospital, he walked in. Here is one eyewitness account.
They brought the press secretary in first. They rolled him by. And the president walked in holding his... One guy was holding him on the side, and he was holding his arm.
And what did you see? I mean, was he bleeding badly?
Well, I couldn't see that much blood because he still had on his jacket, and you could see a little spot of blood up on his...
But he was walking?
Yeah, he was walking.
Top officials of the Reagan cabinet, meanwhile, gathered in the Situation Room at the White House. Shortly after 4 p.m., a visibly shaken Secretary of State Alexander Haig told reporters that as of now, I am in control in the White House.
We have informed our friends abroad of the situation, the president's condition as we know it, stable, now undergoing surgery, and there are absolutely no alert measures that are necessary at this time or contemplated.
The president's top White House staff went to the hospital, from where aide Lynn Nofziger briefed reporters and told them that the president never lost his sense of humor.
As he was going down the hall on the gurney, I guess they call him, to surgery, he winked at Baker. He had earlier told Senator Laxalt, who was there, don't worry about me, I'll make it. He had told Mrs. Reagan, honey, I forgot to duck. I forgot to duck. And as they were wheeling him into surgery, he saw Meese and Baker and Deaver there, and he said, who's minding the store? And then when he got into the operating room, he looked at the doctors and he said, please tell me you're Republicans.
So to wrap up, officials here say that the president is still in surgery, that his condition remains stable and good. Leslie Stahl, CBS News, in the briefing room at the White House.
Thank you, Leslie. 3 other persons were hit by gunfire this afternoon. They were Tim McCarthy, a Secret Service agent, Thomas Delahanty, a Washington District of Columbia policeman, and Jim Brady, who is the White House press secretary. Bill Plant has prepared a report on their conditions.
James Scott Brady, shot today in the attack on the president, is 40 years old. He came to work on the Reagan campaign as an issues and political advisor just about a year ago, after working for the candidacy of John Connally. Brady began serving as Mr. Reagan's press spokesman on an informal basis during the fall campaign. He became the spokesman during the transition period and was appointed to the press secretary's job on January 6th of this year. Though he came late to the Reagan inner circle, Brady quickly gained access to the president and to Mr. Reagan's top aides. White House reporters enjoyed Brady's ready wit and humor in the face of the rough and tumble daily exchange of the press briefings. Brady is known affectionately by his friends as the Bear. He has a wife, Sarah, a 2-year-old son, Scott, and a 19-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. Secret Service agent Timothy J. McCarthy, a Chicago native, was at the president's side when the shots were fired. McCarthy, 32, was hit in the chest and liver. His condition after surgery was described as stable, and one source was quoted as saying that things were looking up for McCarthy. District of Columbia police officer Thomas K. Delahanty, 45 years old, a 17-year veteran, was wounded in the neck and shoulder by the shots which were fired at the hotel. His condition was described late today as critical. Bill Plant, CBS News, the White House.
Hero is an overworked word, but I'm sure that it hasn't escaped the notice of many of you, if any, that among today's heroes, Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy, who we're delighted to hear his condition was last reported as improving. McCarthy, as you saw in that videotape, standing just to the president's right, stepped up, took a bullet himself, a bullet one has to assume was designed to hit the president. McCarthy took a bullet. The police officer, Thomas Delahanty, stopped the bullet as he tried to move in the direction of the assailant. We know very little about the condition of James Brady. Early in the afternoon, there were reports that said to be confirmed reports that Brady had not survived the gunshot wound that hit him in the head. Questions have been asked about that. The White House, at last report, said that Brady was, while in serious condition, he was still alive. And Nofziger, when he last addressed the question, said it was his understanding that James Brady was still alive. On that, we will simply have to wait and see. Let's say that the official information, the White House information, is that James Brady, while his condition is serious, is still alive, and that has been the White House position for some time now. Police Officer Delahanty, one of the heroes of the afternoon, was last listed as being in critical condition. Dr. Keith Rimsma, Chief of Surgery with Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center here in New York. The President of the United States has now been in surgery for 2.5 hours. Now, taking into account what you and the other doctors have been saying, that does strike me as beginning to be a long time for this kind of surgery. However, I'm a layman. You tell me as an expert. Reassure me if you can.
I would reassure you that this length of time is not out of the ordinary for this kind of operation. As we reconstructed from what we do know, there was a bullet that entered the left chest. It damaged the blood vessels in the lung. He had a serious enough hemorrhage to require transfusion. He was operated upon, and from what we know, the surgeons were able to control the bleeding, to get the lung re-expanded, and were able to assure Mrs. Reagan that the President was in satisfactory condition. I think the fact that we have not heard more from them may not indicate that the operation is prolonged. It may have to do with some other factors. I would hope that's the case.
You understand the spirit of that question. Obviously, we're all hoping the very best with the President. But any time surgery of any sort goes on this long, the longer it goes on, the more one becomes concerned. But I want to make sure that I understand. You've seen surgery of all kinds performed it yourself, that you personally do not see this 2.5 hours of surgery as necessarily anything ominous about the President's condition.
No, I would not think it is ominous. No.
We'll be standing by, awaiting some official word of the President's condition. At our last report, President Reagan was still in surgery. However, Lynn Nofziger had said that the President was expected out of surgery shortly, and that a physician should be briefing within the hour. Now, that was said about 45 minutes ago, approximately 45 minutes ago. Our coverage from our CBS News headquarters in New York and our CBS News Washington Bureau is continuous and alive and will remain so until we have a definitive report on the President's condition. CBS News also will have a special report tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 o'clock Central Time on the President's condition. I'm handed a note that because of the assassination attempt on President Reagan, organizers of tonight's Academy Awards ceremony decided to postpone the nationally televised program 24 hours. Also, I'm told that Michael Reagan has given an interview to some of our reporters on the West Coast. Michael Reagan, the President's oldest son.
My father has come out of surgery in fine shape. He's in good condition. As my father asked before he went into surgery, and subsequently as we found out it was good Republicans doing the surgery, so he is in good shape, and we plan to just keep in touch the same way all of you are keeping in touch.
Did you believe this when you heard it this morning?
No, not really. I was in a business meeting when it happened, and I've had better days, and I hope to have many better days to come. And it's sad things like this happen, but I'm just hopeful that and happy that my father has come through it. And as I say, that in my house, we are indeed praying for the other people that were wounded.
Mike, have they told you exactly what damage was done by the bullet?
Not really, no. Only that it was, in the left side, and that he is indeed doing well and in good spirits. My dad's been in good spirits for 70 years. I plan for him to be in spirits for another 70 years.
Good to hear his son say that. My dad's been in good spirits for 70 years. No reason to believe he's not now in good spirits. That interview on videotape, I should point out, when we're doing continuous live coverage of this sort, it's sometimes difficult to make it clear when our coverage is live and when it's on videotape. That interview was on videotape. Now, live in our studios in Washington now, our correspondents Jed DeVal and Phil Jones. Jones, who's been working Capitol Hill during the afternoon, and Jed DeVal, who's been in our studios in Washington. Phil Jones, I'd like to know, first of all, have you heard anything from your original sources on the condition of James Brady, the White House press secretary who was shot in the head?
I haven't heard anything in the last couple of hours. I did check with them after Larry Speaks from the White House press office came out, and these sources indicated that the situation was as they had described it earlier. But I have not heard anything in the last couple of hours.
That is that James Brady had not survived the gunshot.
That he had not survived, yes.
Dan, Phil was in the Senate gallery, where he so often is, when the news came through. Phil, what happened at that time?
Well, at that particular moment, the Senate was involved in the debate over many of the budget cuts that President Reagan has proposed. It was in the middle of all of this that Senator Howard Baker, the majority leader, walked onto the Senate floor, took a microphone, and announced that he had just received word that the president had been shot at, but at that time, as everyone was believing, nothing had really happened to the president himself. New Jersey Senator Bill Bradley, who had the floor before Baker made the announcement, started to continue his attempt to get more money put back into the budget, and he said that he was really in a state of anxiety. To quote Bradley, that in the days to come, there should be a chance to reflect and address in some way the underlying sickness in a society where these kinds of events become commonplace. And it was just a short time after Bradley had made these comments that Senator Edward Kennedy, who has seen so much of this personal tragedy in his own family, took to the floor and said that violence and hatred are so alien to everything in this country. It's alien to everything the country is about, and with our prayers must go our resolution to rid our society of violence and its cause. Shortly after this announcement, shortly after this statement from Senator Kennedy, Senator Baker came back on for the second time. I guess about 30 minutes had passed between his first and second appearance, with the bad news that the word had just been received that the president had been hit, and with that, the Senate recessed. There was a noticeable increase in security for all congressional leaders. Shortly after this, outside their offices, more police officers and more detectives were stationed. The Senate chaplain went directly to the hospital. He has been with the Reagan family all afternoon. And just about 6 o'clock, I guess it was, the Senator Baker called the Senate back in, and 3 prayers were given by Senator John Danforth, a Republican from Missouri, 1 for the president, 1 for those who had been injured, and perhaps as important as any, 1 for the country. Jed.
Thank you, Phil. Those the prayers that were offered by Senator Danforth came in when the session was called back in?
Came at about 6 o'clock tonight when Senator Baker called everybody back. He had been waiting to get some word on the condition of the president before they decided whether or not to continue business. But at that point it was too late, and no one was in the mood to talk about any budget cuts, and so they'll resume all that tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Well, you had a wire report in the middle of the afternoon, Phil, that is appropriate now, that groups of senators went and clustered around television sets after the thing, and that among them were Kennedy, whose 2 brothers were killed by assassins, and Senator Russell Long, whose father, Huey Long of Louisiana, was killed by an assassin as well.
Everybody did leave the floor. I guess there really were only about a dozen or so on the floor at the time the first announcement came. But I mean, there clearly was no mood to talk about anything in the way of business.
And yet business may be postponed yet again tomorrow till further down the line.
I think should also mention that many of them were commenting about how they had really been sort of concerned about the president's security from the last time he was on the Hill, which was just a few weeks ago when he made his trip up there to work with the congressional leaders on his budget cuts. And, you know, he's so friendly, and he's always wanting to talk with reporters and wave at anybody standing by. And as he left the Capitol building, he stopped and talked with some reporters, and then walked over to his limousine and stepped up and waved at, I would guess, 150 or 200 people who had gathered and were only 25, 30 feet from him. And as the limousine drove away, many of the Capitol Hill police officers were saying, "My lands, I am glad he's gone." They were very anxious over this.
The president spoke about this at his birthday party last month, and David Broder wrote about it in today's Washington Post, quoting the president speaking to the vice president's wife at one of those. There were several birthday parties here last month. That the president leaned over to Barbara Bush and said, "I want to ask you a very personal question. Is George happy with his job? Does he feel what he's doing is worthwhile? I just want to be sure he's doing everything. If the awful should happen, George should know everything." David Broder quoting the president last month. Thank you. Dan?
Judd, as you know, among the more experienced congressmen in Washington is Congressman Jim Wright of Fort Worth. Congressman Wright, the second in command of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, has an interview with John Ferrugia of our staff. Jim Wright was with Bush when he came back from Texas.
What can you tell us about the reaction by Mr. Bush as to what specifically should be done?
Well, what should be done is to remain calm and certainly not to panic under any circumstances, and to make a clear demonstration to the world that this government is in good shape, that the President of the United States is alive, and that he is expected to have a full and very satisfactory recovery, and in every way to avoid any implication to the contrary. I think that's what's to be done.
Mr. Wright, what was going on during the flight with Mr. Bush up there? What were they talking about? What was his mood?
Well, of course, his mood was one of shock and utter disbelief. He said, among other things, he said that he hadn't known Mr. Reagan extremely well for an extremely long period of time, but he found it utterly incomprehensible that anyone could work up a feeling of sufficient malice toward Ronald Reagan to want him dead. Well, I guess that's a natural feeling that you would entertain toward anybody with whom you'd worked and known, but it doesn't depend upon a logical explanation of malice to try to fathom the depths of the peculiar illness that besets an assassin. I don't know what makes them do it. I've read the literature, and I guess all of you have, and there's just a peculiar virus of insanity that besets people like that.
Was Mr. Bush going directly to the hospital after the observatory?
I'm not really at liberty to say where Mr. Bush is going. I suspect that he will want to see the president, but I don't know for sure, and while he discussed with me what he probably would do, I think that remains for him to announce rather than for me.
Were you with the vice president when he heard?
No, I was not. I was sitting at a table in an adjoining room when the news came, and I was not with him the moment he heard it, no.
Could you recap his mood again when you first saw him after he heard?
It was, I think the mood of the vice president was one that all Americans would find very commendable in the personal sense. He was in complete control of himself and of his emotions. He was, of course, stunned, as all of us were, by the shocking news. And yet there was not a moment's hesitation in his mind as to what his duty was, what he should be doing. He certainly wasn't indecisive. He was decisive, but he was very calm.
Did he decide?
Anybody who knows George Bush and his experience would not be surprised to hear it said by Congressman Jim Wright of Texas, who was with Vice President Bush this afternoon, to hear him say that George Bush was calm. The situation is that our live and continuous coverage by CBS News will continue until we have some definitive word on President Reagan's condition. The president has been in surgery for about 2 hours and 45 minutes now at George Washington University in the nation's capital. Exploratory surgery. A .22 caliber bullet struck him in the left chest, missed his heart, but collapsed partially a lung. We're assured by physicians that that may not be as serious as it sounds, that the exploratory surgery, from all indications, was going in a routine fashion. Mrs. Reagan has been told that her husband's condition continues to be, quote, good. We are awaiting some official further word on President Reagan's condition. 3 other persons hit by the gunfire outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. Washington District of Columbia policeman Thomas Delahanty said to be in critical condition. Secret Service man Tim McCarthy in serious but improving condition. James Brady, the press secretary to President Reagan, described earlier in the afternoon as not having survived the gunshot wound to his head. Officially said by the White House to be in serious condition, a big question mark beside James Brady and the listing of his condition. That is the situation at the moment. We are aware that many of you tune in this time of evening expecting to hear a full newscast, and in the spirit of that, while we await further word on President Reagan's condition, we will say at least the latest news from Poland includes the fact that Poland appears to have taken a step back from the brink today, but the crisis is far from over, according to our correspondent Bert Quint in Warsaw. After several hours of negotiations with government officials in Poland's capital, the leaders of Solidarity, the union, agreed to call off the open-ended general strike they had scheduled for tomorrow. Officials of the union will meet amongst themselves in Gdansk tomorrow to formally ratify the decision not to strike and the agreement reached with the Warsaw government today. Solidarity leader Lech Walesa says the union got 70% of what it wanted, including, he says, a key demand, punishment of those involved in the beatings of union activists in Bydgoszcz on March 19th. As yet tonight, no official reaction from Moscow, but Warsaw-packed military exercises continue in and around Poland. That is the latest information from Poland. We are in fairly steady contact with veteran CBS News foreign correspondent Bert Quint in Warsaw, and if there are any further developments on that story, we will, of course, pass them along to you. I should also say that CBS News intends to present a special broadcast on the attempted assassination of President Reagan tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 7 o'clock Central Time. In the meantime, our continuous and live coverage will go on here in New York and in Washington. And in Washington, Lim Tucker, who was a witness to the shooting of President Reagan today, is in our Washington studio to narrate the videotape of the shooting scene just outside the Washington Hilton Hotel.
His speech to a union crowd had gone well, so Ronald Reagan had good reason to smile as he left through a private exit of the Washington Hilton Hotel.
Mr. President.
Now in slow motion. At this point, no one on the scene seemed to realize that the president had been shot. The expression on his face changed, but it appeared only that he had been pushed into his limousine by a Secret Service agent, routine in dangerous situations, so that he could be hurried away. The 6 shots came from just to the right and slightly behind where I was standing with several television crews and other reporters. But the roped-off area contained passers-by as well as news people. And now another angle on the same scene. As the president was being hurried away, agents and policemen pounced on the alleged assailant, and as soon as a police car could be pulled up, he was taken away.
Come on, lay those guys, back up. Hold here, guys. Hold. Right, get out of the way, get out of here.
And then it became quite obvious that not only had 3 people been wounded, but one was James Brady, the press secretary. Lying almost on top of Brady was a wounded D.C. police officer. And just up the driveway, a Secret Service agent.
Lem Tucker, in Washington, as one who was on the scene and an eyewitness, the assumption has been, including an assumption by law enforcement officers all during the afternoon and evening, that the shots came from one source and one source only. Just double checking, did you see or hear anything that would lead you to think to the contrary?
No, I didn't. One of our colleagues later in roaming through the crowd did talk to someone who said that he had seen a man with a black box who was running quite rapidly from the scene, and police were interested in that report from one eyewitness. I was not aware of more than one source. The source uncomfortably close to where I was standing, just behind me to the right, and the 5 or 6 shots we thought at the time. Later we heard a tape recording of them, and as you heard on the tape, 6 shots. One source.
Well, Lem, one certainly doesn't want to speculate too widely, but as we pointed out earlier during the afternoon, that what the eyewitness saw as a man with a black box may very well have been the White House aide who carries the communications equipment for the president and some first aid equipment when he made a run around the front of the limousine. You could clearly see that in the videotape. It may very well have been that.
Eyewitnesses, despite what we may all think in this business, since we are basically eyewitnesses, sometimes even the best become just a bit unreliable in that kind of situation. I mean, utter pandemonium broke out, as you could see on the videotape, and it was very difficult at first to know where the shots came from, except that they were very close, to know who was where. And I suspect that's partially what led to the confusion over whether or not Mr. Reagan had been injured. In fact, a White House spokesman who was on the scene said, no, he was not, which is what we all went with for a while. So eyewitness reports, as you were suggesting, Dan, can be, well, it takes time to filter out of this kind of situation to see just exactly what did happen.
So I don't think it can be stated too often nor forcefully enough that in the immediate wake of something such as this, when it happens, that there is confusion, even among the most experienced and best-intentioned persons. And that, among other things, explains why an official White House spokesman said quickly after the shooting that President Reagan had not been hit. She was operating on the best available information she had at the time, had every reason to believe that that was true. It turned out when the president got to the hospital that he had indeed, after he'd raised his right hand to wave to a crowd at his right, when he raised his left hand, that a shot came in and went under his left arm and struck the president in the chest. And
also, Dan,
yes,
in defense of that White House spokesman who was quoted on the wire, she being Carna Small, the deputy press secretary, I don't believe she was at the scene. I did not see her. So obviously she was working on at that point, quite respectable knowledge of her colleagues who had called in from the field. And as I said, no one there at that point knew the president had been injured. And in a situation like this, there is understandable eagerness to let the public know what's going on. And if you have what appears at the moment to be good news in this awfully bad situation, you don't hesitate to put it out. So I think she was working on the best available knowledge at that point and from her vantage point.
Exactly so, Lem. And again, thank you, and our respects for an afternoon of very solid reporting in a difficult situation. 25-year-old John Hickley, Jr. from Evergreen, Colorado, has been charged with 2 counts in the case. We have a still photograph, yet another still photograph. This is a photograph taken some time ago of a man identified as John Hinckley, Jr. of Evergreen, Colorado. This photograph taken January 21st, 1981. Now, the source of this photograph is the Colorado Highway Department photo. We do not know why the Colorado Highway Department would have a photograph of John Hinckley, Jr., but that was given as the source of this particular photograph. Now, this man is a suspect in the case and has now been charged with attempted assassination of the President of the United States. That's a federal offense under a new and recently revised law, and also with assault with intent to kill on a police officer. The President wounded in the chest by a .22 caliber slug. Mr. Reagan has been in surgery for now, coming up soon in 6 minutes. It will have been 3 hours in surgery. Double check me if you will. Dr. Keith Reemsma, Chief of Surgery at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center here in New York. Soon to be 3 hours. Would you consider that an extraordinary amount of time for such surgery, Doctor?
No, not extraordinary. I'm sure that we're all eagerly awaiting the report from the physicians taking care of the president, but I'm still optimistic.
Well, I appreciate that, Doctor, and one of the reasons you're here, one of the main reasons you're here, is to give us expert opinion and guidance as we go along. And you would say that although it has been almost 3 hours in this surgery, that you do not yet see any reason to be pessimistic about the president's condition.
No, I would not be pessimistic. I think the fact that the physicians taking care of them has sent out word that his condition is stable, that the operation has, the main portion of the operation has been completed successfully, all that gives cause for hope.
Thank you, Doctor, and Dr. Reemsma will be with us as we go through the evening. Fred Graham, our CBS News legal correspondent, has prepared a background report as complete as we can make it at this early stage on the man charged with the shooting, 25-year-old John Hinckley, Jr.
Little is known of Hinckley except that he's 25 years old, the son of a wealthy Colorado Oil Company executive and a resident of Evergreen, Colorado. Secret Service officials said they had nothing on him in their files of persons considered potentially dangerous to the president, and he has no known police record. Hinckley's family is from Dallas, Texas, and he attended high school there. Immediately after his arrest, he was rushed to District of Columbia Police Headquarters, where guards kept newsmen away as the suspect was being interrogated. Later, a complaint was filed accusing Hinckley of the crime of attempting to assassinate the president, punishable by life imprisonment. If the president should die, the maximum penalty is death under a law that was passed after President Kennedy was assassinated. The law doesn't cover lesser officials, such as Press Secretary James Brady. Dan, as you said a moment ago, Hinckley was also accused of attempting to kill the police officer. And prosecutors say that literally a dozen charges could have been filed against him, but these two are surely enough to hold him without bail until they can get a better handle on the full extent of his alleged crimes. Also, in connection with what you said a moment ago with Lem Tucker, I did speak to prosecutors, and they say that admittedly that their information is sketchy, but that they have no evidence as of now that anyone else was involved.
Well, Fred Graham, we've been trying to drive home through the afternoon that while young Mr. Hinckley was listed for a while, this is John Hinckley Jr., was listed as a suspect in the case, even though he has now been charged, this presumption of innocence has to be maintained. What protections has Hinckley had during this time he's been in the hands of the police? Do we know anything about that? This man may be innocent.
Well, we do know, because, again, I was told by the prosecutors who are working the case that they do not know of any attorney who is representing him. So at least he didn't get into this situation with an attorney ready to assist him. We saw no attorney go into that interrogation room, and as you know, any suspect has the right to talk to an attorney before he's interrogated, and he had to be warned of that right. No attorney came. So all we know is that he went in there and the door closed, and no attorney came that we could see.
Did the District of Columbia Police or any spokesman for them indicate that he'd been given an opportunity to call for an attorney?
Well, in the District of Columbia, Dan, immediately you are given that warning, and you do have that right. It can be waived, and I just presume that for one reason or another that Hinckley, who was being interrogated in the homicide office, but by Secret Service agents, we were told, in the presence of the local officials, simply didn't ask for an attorney.
Fred, are there any indications that special security precautions, protection, has been afforded to Mr. Hinckley?
Oh, yes. Dan, the ghost of Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald was lurking throughout the hallway there. You saw the brief pictures we got. The officers were shooing us off the entire floor there as those pictures were taken. Entire platoons of police were around whenever Hinckley was behind a door. We don't even know where he is now. It's highly unusual that the police and officials here won't even tell you which jail a suspect is being held in. They don't want this man killed the way Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald.
Fred, the question of the order of succession to the President of the United States naturally comes up anytime anyone even takes a shot at a president, much less hits the president. And there was confusion this afternoon when Secretary of State Haig appeared at the White House briefing room to say that he, the Secretary of State, was third in line for succession to the president.
Yes.
When we know that he is not third in line succession. Could you clear that up for us? Let's just go down the list of who succeeds whom in what order according to the most recent constitutional amendment.
Well, Dan,
the most recent amendment was the 25th Amendment, which was finally ratified in 1967. It's never been fully put into effect, so it's a little rusty. But the way it works is that the president would have to declare that he is disabled, or his cabinet would have to declare that he is disabled if he couldn't. Or if the cabinet for some reason wouldn't, then Congress would appoint a body who would declare that the president is disabled. Then Vice President Bush becomes acting president, has the full powers of the office until, unless and until the president recovers and can discharge his duties. The text of the amendment reads off how it goes after